So today we have a very special game of chess between two Nijisanji and VTubers this time. Pomu then plays queen to c7, so of course Finana is going to retreat it. No, she isn't. This is an interesting move, but it's interesting for a very specific reason. It's interesting because it loses you the game in one turn, followed by pawn to f4, and now Pomu plays bishop captures b4 with check. What you of course do is that you cover the king with the bishop on c1. However, Finana has a different move, and it's queen to d2. Now, I don't know how many of you are chess fanatics, but you might be able to figure out why this is a problem. I'm Pomu. Now you can maybe tell what is the play for Pomu, but instead we get a rook captures on h6. Hello everyone. Sorry about that. So today we have a very special game of chess between two Nijisanji and VTubers this time. We have Finana Ryugu with the white pieces and Pomu Rainpuff playing with the black pieces. Now this game seems to be quite interesting because when I put this game into the chess engine, my computer caught on fire. I think there were some shenanigans happening with this game, but we'll see. As you all know, of course, I'm a really big VTuber fan, and I'm also quite an avid chess player. So you know, VTubers, chess, it's always a blast. And of course, when I saw Pomu was playing, I immediately hopped in and watched because, you know, I'm Pomu. This actually isn't the first VTuber chess video I've done. I've done a whole bunch of HoloLive videos with, example, Takanashi Kiara versus Amelia Watson, and Hachima versus Ina, and a whole bunch of other combinations, which are always very enjoyable to watch and just as fun to analyze. So I'll put that in the top right. You can check it out. I don't know if that was top right or not. I feel like it wasn't like that way, but regardless, it'll be in the top right. You can click on that and you can watch the playlist because I've done a whole bunch. Now, just as a disclaimer, because I've gotten really one angry comment, so I think it's pretty well understood, but I just want to put it out there for the record. This video, of course, should not be taken very seriously. It's all in good fun, and Pomu and Finana, of course, very new to chess. This is probably their first game, and they don't really know how the pieces move. So this shouldn't be taken as anything more than just a fun kind of video, just so we can all watch and we can all enjoy and maybe learn a thing or two about how to play chess. And I think games like these, where neither player really knows what they're doing, tends to make very fun analysis videos because the mistakes are very obvious and hilarious a lot of the time. It's always a good time to watch. Be sure to consider leaving a like and subscribing if this is the kind of content you're into. I love making videos on VTubers and anime and, you know, all these kinds of stuff. So if you enjoy, be sure to leave a like and subscribe and let me know what you think of this series and what you'd like to see more of. That being said, why don't we get right into the analysis. So Finana starts off with d4. This is the queen's pawn opening, and then responded by f6 by Pomu, which is it's a little strange. Now you can see on the left, this is the analysis bar. Basically, it says which person it's favoring, and it's definitely favoring Finana right now because this pawn to f6 move is not a traditional one, nor is it a particularly good one. It stops the knight here from developing, and it really doesn't accomplish a lot. It also gives white full control of the board, which of course is not utilized when Finana plays the move pawn to g4. The best move here would definitely be this pawn to e4. You get full control of the center, and it's going to be very hard to develop your pieces as black, but regardless. Next up by Pomu is pawn to f5, which is not a great move either, because of course what you can do as white is you can capture it, which is exactly what Finana does with g captures on f5. So you can see the positional advantage is definitely in Finana's favor. And then Pomu plays pawn to g6, which is also somewhat of a strange move. What white can do here is you can just capture that, and then after captures, you're in a much better position as white. But regardless, that's not what's played. What instead is played is pawn to f6, which kind of nullifies all the progress you've made, because now you've given black a free pawn, but you also let them develop their knight very easily. So it's not a great move, but Pomu does not capture with the knight. Pomu captures with the pawn there. So not super great. White is still technically in the lead by a little bit, just in terms of development. Finana then plays b4, followed by Pomu's c6. Best move here would just capture with the bishop, of course, and then you're also putting the white king in check. But c6 is played, followed by pawn to f4, and now Pomu plays bishop captures b4 with check. And now what you of course do is that you cover the king with the bishop on c1. However, Finana has a different move, and it's queen to d2. Now, I don't know how many of you are chess fanatics, but you might be able to figure out why this is a problem. I'll give you a few seconds to try to figure out as I take a drink here. If you have found the correct move for black, congratulations, you are a genius, and maybe Pomu as well, because Pomu, of course, plays bishop captures on d2 with check. So this game is going to be hard for white, because you are down a queen immediately. So we'll see what happens. After bishop captures, Pomu then plays pawn to h6, followed by knight to f3 by Finana, and then knight to e7 by Pomu, knight to a3 by Finana, and then rook to h7, which is again a kind of a strange move, because at this point it'd probably be best to either castle or develop another piece. Moving the rook down just one spot, it doesn't help you very much positionally, so it's a little strange. But regardless, bishop to g2 by Finana, and then pawn to d6 is played. What's next is bishop to e3, pawn to h5 by Pomu, h4 or knight to h4, rook to h6, defending this pawn here on the g file, followed by knight to c4, and then rook back to h8, which is also strange, but it is what it is. Next up is knight captures on g6. This is definitely not the best move for white. Best move here would actually be knight to d6 with check, because then you don't lose the knight after you capture, but that's what happens. Knight captures on g6, of course, is played by Pomu, and then knight to d6 with check is played now. King to f8 is the best move here. And now bishop to e4. And king to d6. And then bishop to f5. Pomu then plays queen to c7, trying to attack the white knight on d6. So, of course, Finana is going to retreat it. No, she isn't. Pawn to h3 is what's played, followed by, of course, queen captures on d6. And then rook to h2, and now queen to a3. So getting the queen involved, threatening the bishop there on e3. Let's see what Finana reacts with. Rook to b1, which is not the best. Pomu captures the bishop on e3, but the best move here would actually be a queen to a5 with check there. And then you can, after the king moves here, you get a free bishop right there. Instead though, Pomu captures the bishop on e3, which is of course still a good move. And then Finana plays rook to g2. Pomu plays queen to c3 with check. Finana responds with king to f1, and then queen to e3 by Pomu. Rook to e1 by Finana. Queen to d2 is what's played. Finana then plays king to g1. The best move here for white would actually be bishop captures on g6. So you take the knight, and then the king cannot actually recapture it because this rook right here is defending. But regardless, that is not what happens. What happens is king to g1, and then Pomu captures the rook on e1 with check. Now, this match has kind of been a snowball since second one, and it definitely is gonna keep going at this rate. King to h2 is forced, and now queen to f1 is what is played. Now, bishop captures on g6 is played finally. Best move here, though, would actually be rook captures on g6 with check. Actually would be slightly better because then you're threatening some stuff, but regardless, that is not what is played. Pomu captures the rook on g2 with check, and then, of course, king has to capture that. And now you got a free bishop out of that, at least, so king captures on g6 is what is played. Pawn to h4, pawn to d6. You can probably tell by this position that it is essentially impossible for white to win here. Black is up just so much material, and it is basically game over. But that being said, in these kinds of beginner level matches, it's always the case where there could always be a bigger screw up. So you never know, but it's definitely looking rather difficult for Finana. And now king to f1 is played, king to f7, king to e1, rook to h6, pawn to a4, king to f8, and pawn to c4. Another thing I noticed, these three pieces have not moved a single time in this entire game, which is kind of nuts. It's still undeveloped. But now we are finally getting them in the game with bishop to f5 by Pomu, and then pawn to e3, bishop to c2, pawn to e4, and then bishop captures on e4 by Pomu. Pawn to c5, knight to d8, and then pawn captures on d6. King to g8 is what is played by Pomu, and then pawn to f5 is what is played. Pomu then plays rook to e8, pawn to a5 is what is played, and now bishop captures on f5. King to f2, and after pawn captures on a5, we have a mate in 5, which I will show you. King to g2 is what Finana plays. And then, so far, we're still on track for the mate in 6, but something tells me that's not exactly what's going to unfold. We'll see, though. King to f7, king to g1 by Finana, and now rook to e1 with check. King to g2, bishop to d3, king to f2, and now rook to c1. Let me show you the mate in 3. So after rook to e2 with check, something like king to f3 is what is going to be played, and then rook to g6, if something like king to f4, then you simply go bishop to e4. You got a mate in 1 here. d5, it is the only move that can be played by whites, so it's not a stalemate. And then rook to g4, that would have been checkmate there. That is not what happened. Bishop to d3, king to f2, Pomu plays rook to c1, Finana plays king to e3, and Pomu responds with bishop to f5, getting the bishop out of harm's way, and then king to d4 is played. King to e8, and then king captures on f5, so giving up the bishop. I mean, regardless, if at this point you can give up really as many pieces as you want, and it's probably still gonna be a Pomu favored, but regardless, rook to f1 with check is played, and then Finana plays king to e6. Now, this is an interesting move, but it's interesting for a very specific reason. It's interesting because it loses you the game in 1 turn. Of course, Pomu does not see it, but if you just do pawn to f5, that will be checkmate. But again, not exactly what's played here. After king to e6, Pomu plays rook to d8. King to f7 is what is played by Finana. King to c8. And again, at this point, even though it is so insanely lopsided, there's always a chance for a stalemate. There's always a chance for ridiculous blunders. So it's not quite over, even though it's basically over. king to e8, and then we got a mate in 2. What is played is king to b7, but let me show you the mate in 2. It is rook to h7, and then for something like d5, you get rook to e1 with checkmate here. Again, not what happens. King to b7, king captures on d7, rook to h7 with check, king to e8, and then rook to h1 with check is what is played. King to d7 is then played by Finana. Pomu plays king to a6, then white plays king to e6, now rook to e1 with check, and it says it's the best move. It has been a while since we got one of those. King captures on f6 is played. Rook to h6 with check, king to f5, rook to f1 with check, king to e4, rook to e1 with check, and this, you can kind of see the pattern. It's a lot of repeating, you know, moving back and forth and back and forth. You don't want a cat and mouse though, but it's avoided. Rook to h7, king to g6, Pomu plays rook to d7, and now king to h5, making it very easy to checkmate, which is exactly not what happens. Rook to g1 though is played, which is the correct move. And after king to h6 by Finana, Pomu plays rook to g8. Best move here would of course be rook to d6 with check, and then you got a mate in 3 regardless. Where were we? All right, rook to g8 is played by Pomu. Finana plays h5. Rook to d6 is played. King to f7 is forced. And then rook to e8 is played by Pomu. Finana plays king to g7. Rook to e7 by Pomu. King to f8. Got a mate in 3. Rook to c7. King to e8. Rook captures on d4. h6 is played. Now rook to h7, and you got, of course, you have a mate in 1 here. King to f8 is forced. Now you can maybe tell what is the play for Pomu, but instead we get a rook captures on h6, which is still fine. It's still mate in 4, but would have been better if we went with the checkmate there. King to e7, rook to h7 with check, king to e6, rook to e4 with check, king to d6, pawn to a4, king captures on c6 is played, king to a5, king to c5 by Finana, rook to h5 with check, king to c6, rook to c4 with check, king to b7, you have mate in 2, and still mate in 2 after this. Rook to h7 with check, king to king to a8, and of course you got a mate in 1 here, but no. Rook to h8 with check, and we have another mate in 1, but no, no we don't. King to b5, b7 is forced, rook to h6, king to a7, king to a5, king to b7 by Finana, king to b5, king to a7, king to a5. Why are they still doing this? I don't understand. King to b7, rook to h7 with check, king to b8, rook to h8 with king to a7, and then now after a little bit under an hour, if I remember correctly, Pomu plays rook to c7 with checkmate. So that is the game. It was definitely a wild one, and it was kind of over after the first 10 or so moves with the queen, but as these beginner games tend to go, it definitely will drag on towards the end, and there's a good enough chance that you get a stalemate at this point as it is to get a checkmate for black. So again, like I said, you never know, but Pomu was able to close it out with the double rook and king checkmate. So that was an extraordinary game of chess for some pretty funny reasons. Still though, it was a blast to watch, and of course I always enjoy watching VTubers. I always enjoy watching chess and VTubers. It's my favorite thing ever. So I hope you enjoyed the analysis here. Maybe you learned something, maybe not at a certain level, but either way, it was a good time, and I hope you enjoyed. Thank you for watching. Again, I have a whole playlist full of VTuber/anime chess games to watch, so feel free to watch those. And of course, have an excellent day.